to study the Bible more frequently, which leads to us loving God more fervently, which leads to us thinking, speaking, acting, and responding more biblically. That's it, ladies and gentlemen, responding more biblically. So, it's my aim and hope tonight with this new study that we're doing. As I said, I was trying to figure out how I could do this study to where it would be some expository teaching through a book, but yet dealing with specific subjects in a book, and yet dealing with principles, with people, and characters from the book. And so it's just an eclectic gathering, I guess I should say, tonight, this new series that we're going to be doing. It's entitled New Insights from Old Testament Characters, as you can see by your outline. My hope is to finish it tonight. If not, guess what, y'all? We just pick up from it on next week. But for my time space, I do plan on staying within the time space. We're going to read more scriptures tonight, pull up more things from the scriptures as we are reading them. But tonight, we're looking at new insights from Old Testament characters. I chose Gideon for many, many reasons. But if I were to just compact the reasons to a few, I guess it's because most of the time when people talk about Gideon, they talk about, the first part of his life, and you don't hear very much about the second part of Gideon's life. And I want us to take the whole picture of his life and see how we can make these principles or what happened or what truths we can learn, what insights we can glean to make us better. So we're going to be looking, beginning in Judges chapter 6. Actually, I'm going to start at verse 1. I know I gave you verse 11, but I got to thinking about it. I'm going to do Judges chapter 6, verse 1, and we'll see how far we get to chapter 8, verse 32. Yeah, how many of you are familiar with Gideon? Let me see your hand. If you're familiar with Gideon. Okay. All right, then. Well, thank you for your honesty. So for you who not, I could tell y'all anything and y'all going to believe me, right? Well, we teach the Bible here, so everything we share will come from the Bible. Gideon. My opening thought says, it's a question. Are you like Gideon? Does your lack of faith, causes you to test God a lot? Does your lack of faith causes you to test God a lot or often? I'm tall enough to admit there was a period of time in my life where Gideon could not hold a light to me in testing God. I'm not proud of it. I'm just telling you the truth about it. And when I say that is that even though I felt very strongly that God was speaking to me about particular things, I would test God. I would put God to the test. I would question him. I'm not saying you're supposed to do that. I'm telling you personally what I would do. And the period that I'm speaking even more of is probably the period of time when God was calling me to preach. This year, May the 12th of this year will be 38 years. I preached my first sermon May the 12th, 38 years ago. And it's been an interesting journey. But prior to that journey, I tested God because I didn't want to preach. I don't want to preach. I don't want to preach. I put God through tests. I asked him. I queried him, challenged him to things, and God made it clear. And one of the things that, and I think about what he did with Gideon, one of the things that really stands out for me, and I know it's hard to believe when I tell people this, but I know it to be as true as everything. From April the 17th from January 17th to April the 26th, the year I was called to preach, I didn't sleep that time, that whole period. I would go to bed at night. I would, try to make myself go to sleep, do all kind of things, and take hot showers, turn the air conditioner on cold, and try to freeze myself to sleep, and God would not let me sleep. I would find myself sitting up, reading the Bible, and then going to work, and thinking that I'd be tired enough I wrestled with God from January 17th to April the 26th. One of these times I'll tell y'all the whole story about that. And so we got through that, and then years later, when he called me to pastor, because the deal I cut with God was, I'll preach, but I ain't going to pastor. That's the deal I cut with God. Y'all don't know nothing about deals you're cutting with God and telling God what you're going to do. So my thing, I told God I'll preach. I'll be assistant pastor. I'll be the best assistant associate. I'll be the best support to any senior pastor around, but I'm not going to pastor. And what Brother Mickey oftentimes says, you want to make God laugh, tell him what you going to do. And I'm sure God laughed. I'm sure God probably still laughing at that deal. And the struggle I had in testing God to pastoring, there was another period of time where I was wrongfully testing God. But I could kind of identify with Gideon because I wanted to make sure that it was God calling me and it wasn't me calling me to something. Because you could look at pastoring from the pulpit or from a video camera, and you could think, man, I want to do that when I get big. That's cool. You wear a nice suit, you stand in front of folks, everybody look at you when you talk, and you only do it for like 45, 50 minutes a week, then you do a Bible study. Man, that's cool. You get to drive a fancy car. This is what people think about. Man, I want to do that. Y'all, that's not pastoring by any means. And so I didn't want to pastor, so I went through that. I put God through the test for that. And I think about Gideon because I, too, like him, was trying to make certain that it was God calling me and not me calling me to something that could make me look like somebody. And see, if you only read the first half of Gideon's story and not the second half of Gideon's story, you would think that his story ended real well. And so I thought, hey, let's spend a Tuesday night or a couple of Tuesday nights, however long it takes us to get through this. But the point is, do you lack or do you have the kind of faith that causes you to test God when God has instructed you or moved upon you to do something? My opening statement says this: when Gideon hears he will be used by God to save the Israelite people from their oppressors, he doesn't really believe it at first. That's like me when I call the priest. No, God, not me. Call the pastor. No, not me. So Gideon tests God. And right off the bat, ladies and gentlemen, this contradicts the command found in Deuteronomy 6 and 16. Deuteronomy 6 and 16, there is a command that says, you shall not put the Lord your God to the test as you test him at Massah. It's not for us to put God to the test. It's for us to trust God. But because of uncertainty and because of immaturity, but because of many other things that, in the lives of believers, new believers, we find ourselves many times testing God. I want to read some of my commentary. Then we're going to begin looking at Joshua and kind of reading through it so you can kind of get an idea of who this Gideon guy is. Matter of fact, we're going to spend a little time and probably read through, I don't know. I might read through, excuse me, chapter 7. But let's begin with Judges chapter 6, verse 1. Listen to the commentary. Compared with some of the other judges ruling Israel. Now, let me stop again. Expository preaching and teaching. Judges were not kings. Excuse me. Kings were not judges. This is faithfulness right here. This ain't for my breath, y'all. He trying to tell me about my cough. All right, thank you. So judges are not kings, and kings are not judges. Judges were the things that were in place before kings. Judges did a lot of stuff as it relates to military and warfare. You're going to see what Gideon does. But kings, they had a different scope, if you will. As a matter of fact, God spoke with some kings as it deals with giving them directions on how to lead the people, not just militarily, but what? Spiritually. So there's a difference between, excuse me, a judge and a king. Gideon is a judge before the government of kings come into place. Gideon is one of those judges. And when you come to know the story of him, it's strange that he would be considered one of the best judges when you look at his life. So let's look at this. Compared with the other judges ruling Israel, Gideon seems to get a lot of press in the Old Testament. His story covers almost 2 chapters in the book of Judges, compared with the other judges who only get a small part of 1 chapter. It may surprise you to find Gideon described as the greatest judge of Israel, because when he is introduced to us, which we're going to look at that shortly, he's actually hiding from the enemies on the threshing floor. Now you got to remember, judges played a great role in the military defeating of other armies. Also, Gideon is from the least of the least in terms of tribes, but yet he receives a call from God to take on the Midianites, a very large nomadic group of warriors who had depleted Israel of their supplies. You know, Israel had some supplies, and these different groups were coming in, and they were depleting them of their supplies. So let's read Judges chapter 6, and I'll spot read and see when I want to add some things. Then the son of Israel did what was the sons of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. And the Lord gave them into the hands of the Midians for 7 years. So now the Midians, I just told you who they were. They were a nomadic group. So understand what it had. Let's see how I want to say this. You know how our modern day, we're seeing Ukraine maybe being looted and plunged by Russia. Now they say Ukraine getting some good licks in now, but I'm just saying, how a country can be depleted and all of this stuff is going on. Well, God allowed the Midianites to have that kind of rule over the Israelites for 7 years. God allowed it. We'll tell you why. The Bible will tell you why he did it in a little bit. It says the power of the Midian prevailed against Israel. Because of Midian, the sons of Israel made for themselves the dens which were in the mountains and the caves and the strongholds. For it was when Israel had sown that the Midianites would come up with the Amalekites and the sons of the east and go against them. Watch this, ladies and gentlemen. Here's another principle. Remember, I told you insights. Yeah. Your enemies will make friends with your other enemies and come against you. Amen. Your enemies will make friends with your other enemies. They will align with them and come against you, especially when you're doing the work of God. All right, y'all act like y'all don't have no family members and treated y'all bad. I know what I'm talking about. It says, so they would camp against them and destroy the produce of the earth as far as Gaza. So in other words, the Israelites had land, they would cultivate and all that. Again, you're agrarian people. So if you're agrarian people, when you tear up my food, when you rob from my, fields, that's like closing down my bank account, my checking account, my saving account, 401k plan, Bitcoin, everything. So he said they would camp against them and destroy the produce of the earth as far as Gaza and leave no sustenance in Israel, as well as no sheep, ox, or donkey. So they would also steal the animals that they would use to farm the land. And they did, y'all, this not for 7 minutes, for 7 years. Just imagine. We talk about being in debt and all that. Just imagine being, and here's the thing, and it's God allowed. Do you understand what I'm saying? God allowed it to happen. So if God allowed it, directed or whatever, ain't nothing you can do about it. It says, for they would come up with their livestock and their tents, and they would come in like locusts for number. Man, locusts, if you ever seen stories of locusts, when they leave a field, there ain't nothing left. Both they and their camels were innumerable, and they came into the land to devastate it. So Israel, Israel was brought very low because of their enemies, Midian. And the sons of Israel cried to the Lord. Now it came about when the sons of Israel cried to the Lord on account of the Midianites, that the Lord sent a prophet. This kind of goes along with everything we've been talking about in the past. God, he spoke through the prophet, he spoke through the patriarchs, anyhow. The Lord sent a prophet to the sons of Israel, and he said to them, thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, it was I who brought you up from Egypt and brought you out of the house of slavery. I delivered you from the hands of the Egyptians and from the hands of all your oppressors, and depossessed them before you and gave you their land. Let me pause, y'all. Don't get to thinking because things have got good for you, don't think that God was not involved in the things getting good for you. If you got a whole lot, God gave it to you. If you got a little bit, God gave it to you. Whatever you have, you got to understand, it came from God. And then you can mess around and get the job, the education, the association, the affiliation, and then you'll forget God. And get to live in your life like you have what you have because of who you are instead of who God is. So he said, no, I want you to remember, I delivered you from the hands of the Egyptians, from the hands of the oppressors, and deposed them before you and gave you their land. Verse 10. And I said to you, I am the Lord your God. You should not fear the other small gods of the Amorites in whose land you live. But you have not, what? Obeyed me. Remember, we're trying to get insights from Gideon. Why would God cause things like this to happen? Why would we be oppressed? Why would our enemies look like they have up on us? Why is God allowing all this stuff to happen? Why? Y'all, it could be answered in, let's see how many words. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 6. But you have not obeyed me. See, we get to looking at the immediate. Why this is happening? Why this is happening? Why is this relationship? Why is this church? Why is this job? Why is this? Why is this? You have not obeyed me. Verse 11. And this is where now Gideon begins to come on the scene. Then the angel of the Lord came and sat under the oak that was in Ophrah, which belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, and his son Gideon was beating out wheat in the winepress in order to save it from the Midianites. In other words, long story short, he was kind of hiding, some stuff so that the Midianites wouldn't be getting everything, Sort of like if your wife hide the honey buns from you, it's 6 come in the pack, and she looking at me, 6 come in the pack, and then it get down low, and then you can't find the honey buns. And then you come home and you ask, "Baby, where the honey buns?" She was beating them in the wine press trying to hide them from the Michaelites, you know. It says, the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to him, "The Lord is with you, O valiant warrior." Now you got to remember, and this is sort of like, again, going back to my calling to preach and all this. Oh, God, who you calling? No. You know, there's a couple of times I like, God, you know who I am, right? You know my heart. You know I love you. Well, you know I like you. And I have made a promise that one day, I'm going to follow you completely, but come on, Lord, it's 22 years old, man. It's 21 years old. I just got legal like a year and a half ago, and you're trying to snatch me out the fun? And then for him to think that I'm going to in some way, sometime, at some point, going to prove my valiance, if I can say, of being a warrior for God. He thought more like me, like Gideon. He can't be talking to me. You calling me a conqueror? Come on, God. But God knew, and it proved that it is in fact was God calling of Gideon. Let's read on. Then Gideon said to him, "O my Lord of hosts, if the Lord is with us, why then has all this happened to us?" Anybody ever tried that? Anybody ever tried that? Get beside yourself. You may not even say it with lips, but boy, you be thinking it, and that's just like saying it with your lips to the Lord. Why is all this happening to us? And where are all his miracles which our fathers told us about, saying, "Did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt? But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hand of the Midianites." Why start something, God, if you're going to cause it to close down? The Lord looked at him and said, "Go in this your strength and deliver Israel from the hand of Midian. Have I not sent you?" In other words, like when your mom said, "Did you hear what I said?" He said to him, "O Lord, how shall I deliver Israel?" Have you ever been placed in that position where, okay, you feel very sensitive, very strong, and God has called you to do something, but then you God, but how am I supposed to do this? He says, "Behold, my family is the least in Manasseh," which I told you he was from one of the least tribes, the smallest tribes, most like insignificant tribes of all other 12. He says, "And I'm the youngest in my father's house." He wasn't even the eldest son. He was the youngest in his father's house. Verse 16. But the Lord said to him, "Surely I will be with you, and you shall defeat Midian as one man." Now you got to remember, this is a valiant set of warriors. These nomadic people, these are warriors. I mean, this is what they do. This is how they, let's keep reading. I'll keep reading and then we'll. So Gideon said to him, "If now I have found favor in your sight, then show me a sign." I laugh at that because, y'all know we be looking at them signs, don't you? You be driving down the road, Lord, if you be like a quarter mile away from the red light, green light, Lord, if that light green when I get up there, that's a sign that you want me to go to the mall and spend money, whatever. So Gideon said to him, "If I have found favor in your sight, then show me a sign that it is you who speak with me. Please do not depart from here until I come back to you and bring out my offering and lay it before you." And he said, "I will remain until you return." Now you got to remember, he's actually talking to, as the Bible calls, the angel of the Lord. But who is the angel of the Lord? Well, quick answer before, we'll deal with it in question and answers afterwards. But an angel of the Lord is always viewed as a theophany of God. It's a presence of God in form on earth, before Christ came. So it says, then Gideon went out and he prepared a young goat and unleavened bread from, notice how he's going to worship, he's preparing his meal offering. He said, bread for the ephod of flour, and he put the meat in the basket and the broth in a pot and brought them out to him under the oak and presented them. Because remember, he don't know right now who this is. It says, the angel of God said to him, take the meat and the unleavened bread and lay them on this rock, pour out the broth, and he did so. Then the angel of the Lord put out the end of the staff that was in his hand and touched the meat and the unleavened bread, and fire sprang up from the rock, consumed the meat, the unleavened bread. Then the angel of the Lord vanished from his sight. When Gideon saw that he was the angel of the Lord, he said, alas, O Lord God, for now I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face. The Lord said to him, peace to you, and do not fear, you shall not die. Then Gideon built an altar there to the Lord and named it, the Lord is peace. To this day it is still in Ophrah and the Abiezrites. Now the same night the Lord said to him, take your father's bull and a second bull, 7 years old, and pull down the altar of Baal, which belongs to your father. His father was a Baal worshiper, and cut down the Asherah that is beside it. And build an altar to the Lord your God on the top of this stronghold in an orderly manner, and take a second bull in there and offer a burnt offering, which the wood of the Asherah which you shall cut down. Then Gideon took 10 men of his servants, and he did as the Lord had spoken to him. And because he was too afraid of his father's household and the men of the city to do it by day, he did it what? How many of you Christians scared of folk? You don't want folk to think things of you or to come after you or speak after you, because he know if his daddy see what he doing and the cousin, Pookie them tell him, what he doing over there, they going to come after him. So just like, Nicodemus, he came, he did his work at night. Verse 28. When the men of the city arose early in the morning, behold, the altar of Baal was torn down, because that's where they were doing false worship. And the Asherah which was sided was cut down, and the second bull was offered, and then the altar which had been built. They said to one another, who did this thing? And when they searched about and inquired, they said, Gideon, the son of Joash, did this thing. Then the men of the city said to Joash, bring out your son, that he may what? Die, for he has torn down the altar of Baal, and indeed he has cut down the Asherah, which was what? Beside it. Folk wanted to kill him for him interrupting their worship. Somebody get that in a minute. Here he is, based on his acts and statements, he's saying that they're worshiping of Baal and the Asherites and all that. This is false worship, so he tears it down. They want to kill him. Now you got to remember, these were God's people. That'll catch you up with you a little bit. See, even today, ladies and gentlemen, there's a lot of people who are claiming to be God's people who are engaged in false worship. It's worship that pleases them, because that's what that worship that they were engaging in did. It pleases them, but it did not please God. Y'all, this is not something new. This has been going on since the beginning. But Joash said to all who stood against him, will you contend for Baal, or will you deliver him? Whoever will plead for him shall be put to death by morning. If he is still a god, let him contend for himself, because someone has torn down his altar. Therefore, on that day, he named him, meaning Gideon, Jerubbaal, that is to say, let Baal contend against him, because he had torn down his altar. So Gideon's name is changed by them from Gideon to Jerubbaal. Then all the Midianites and the Amalekites and the sons of the east assembled themselves, and they crossed over and camped near the valley of Jezreel. So the Spirit of the Lord came upon Gideon and blew a trumpet, and the Abiezrites were called together to follow him. he sent messengers throughout Manasseh, and they were also called together to follow him. And he sent the messengers to Asher, Zebulun, Naphtali, and they came up to meet him. Those are tribes of the 12 tribes of Israel. Then Gideon said to God, if you would deliver Israel through me, as you have spoken, because remember God told him he would deliver them. Behold, I will put a fleece. So now he's what again? He's testing God. Before he go to battle, like, all right, God, before I do this, I'm going to test you. All right, God, I'm going to start a church, but before I do it, I want to test you. All right, God, I'm going to preach, but before I do it, I'm going to test you. All right, God, I'm going to quit my corporate six-figure job that, has provided, in my mind, all the means for me all these years, and I've got comfortable with, to go to a startup church that was starting up, which I promised to not take no money for the first 2 years. So now, God, if I quit my corporate job, I can't take a salary for the first 2 years because that's the deal I cut with you. Now, God didn't tell me to cut that deal with him. But that's the deal I cut with God when we started the church. He said, for the first 2 years, God, I ain't going to take no salary. Because in my mind, Steve, I was going to be working on a six-figure job. I don't need them people's money. 2 years into the church, we stopped it. And now I got to go 2 years without taking any salary because that's the deal I make with God. If y'all know my life, the irony of where I'm at now is anyhow. He says, behold, so he's getting ready to test God. He says, I'm going to put out a fleece, a wool on the threshing floor. If there's dew on the fleece only, and it's dry on all the ground around it, then I will know that you will deliver Israel through me as you have spoken. In other words, saying, then I'm going to do what you told me to do. Just do this, all right? Let's read the next verse. And it was so. When he arose early the next morning, and he squeezed the fleece, he drained the dew from the fleece, a bowl full of water. Remember, a bowl full of water. Then Gideon said to God, do not let your anger burn against me, that I may speak once more. In other words, God, I know what you're thinking. I know what I said, but don't be mad. That's basically what he's saying. Please, let me make a test once more with the fleece. Let it now be dry on the fleece, and let there be dew on the ground all around it. God did so that night, for it was only dry on the fleece, and dew was all on the ground. Come on, you ain't going to have wool on the ground. All the ground around you is wet, but the wool is completely dry. This moves us to chapter 7. Then Zerubbabel, that is Gideon, and all the people who were with him rose early and camped beside the spring of Harod and the camp of Midian, and on the north side of them by the hill of Morah in the valley. And the Lord said to Gideon, the people who are with you are too many for me to give you the Midian in the hands of Israel, and they will come boastful, saying, my own power has delivered me. So now and now we're going to look at our outline. So now he's been made for sure in his mind that it was God who was telling him to go to war against the Midianites. And now he's gathering all these people to go to war against the Midianites, and we'll pick up from there. But let's finish reading our commentary. When God wanted Gideon to bring an army to take on the enormous Midianite army, he first brings 32,000 men. That's what Judges chapter 7 is about. And although not as sizable as the Midianites, it's enough for Gideon to feel comfortable with leading the charge. Now, it was more Midianites than it was going to be men with Gideon, but you got to remember, Gideon got the fleece guard on him. He got the guard who can turn the water. He got the miracle guard behind him, and so he figured, I take 32,000 men with me, and God, okay, 32,000 men and God, we can pull this off. See, the emphasis wasn't on God; it was on the 32,000 men, and God knew that was Gideon's heart. Let me help y'all out. Like I'm telling you my story because I don't want it to be your story. When you try to impress God, God really knows, the thoughts and intents of your heart. When I was trying to impress God with the fact that, God, I ain't going to take a salary for the first 2 years of the church because, it was sounding spiritual to me. But to God, it was me bragging. Although it's not as sizable as the Midianites, it's enough for Gideon to be comfortable with leading the charge. But God, and I'll put that in bold on your paper, y'all. But God had other plans. Anybody in here besides me made plans? And then God done changed the plans. Come on now. You made the plans, you laid them out. And here, y'all know what? We don't never make plans that don't work in our mind, do we? Come on, y'all. We get enough of enough to have enough for what we want. Come on, y'all. When we plan, we know what we want to do. We make sure that our plan will be enough. But God had other plans. That ought to be the story of every believer's life. God had other plans. Millennials, are y'all hearing me? Virtual audience, are y'all hearing me today? But God, old folk, fools, children, babies, are y'all hearing me? But God had other plans. Man. Woo. I wanted to be a forensic science cop. I'd have been on the beat. I could have been retired by now, y'all. That's what it was. Y'all, way before CSI came out, I made my mind because I'm the history guy. And I noticed everything. I already knew what I wanted to be. They just didn't call it there back then. But I wanted to be a forensic police officer. Not be there when the shooting go on. I show up after the bullets done fly. And based on my training, I can look and say, okay, that happened and that happened, that happened. That's what I wanted to be. That was it. Yeah, that was it. I'm going to be a forensic cop. Been retired now, y'all. Working a part-time job on the side, But God had other plans. I need you to hear me, because remember, we're talking about growing insights from Gideon. I tell you, I don't have to finish this, y'all. We can pick up next week. I'm going to stop at 8, but God had other plans. The people that I dated before my wife, in my mind was, yeah. But God had other plans. And I know now, out of all the others before, she is the one. Because God plans for my life, including ministry, and had to have a mate who would follow me in the good times with ministry as the lean time with ministry, and who would have a love for God herself, and who would be pursuing God herself and not, Yeah, but God had other plans. Yeah. I told you I wanted to travel the world. I was third grade, sneaking in the bathroom. There's 8 people in our family, 6 kids, 2 adults, and 1 bathroom. Y'all probably don't know nothing about all that. And my problem was at night, I didn't take girly magazines in the bathroom. I took National Geographic magazines from the school, the library. And I was sitting there going through National Geographic. Man, I want to go there. Man, I want to go. Mama, come get this fool out the bathroom. Michael's still in the bathroom. Because I couldn't do my National Geographic if I had to go in the bathroom to read my National Geographic. I wanted to travel the world. Little did I know, but God had other plans. But God had allowed us to travel, but it was to do ministry. I ain't had no plans for ministry. I just wanted to see the world. But God had other plans. Ladies and gentlemen, if you don't hear anything I say tonight, you remember those words. But God had other plans. Because you can make all the plans you want, from mates to ministry to money to whatever. God had other plans. He'll allow you to make the money, but in one of those Old Testament minor prophets said, I'll let you make the money, but on the way home, I'll cause holes to be in your pockets. I'll let you earn it, but you won't even be able to use it for what you want to use it for. But God had other plans. God enlisted a series of tests of his own on Gideon, reminiscent of the test Gideon had for him in the previous chapter. In other words, God say, oh, you going to put me to the test? All right, then, Gideon. Here's a couple tests for you. Oh, that mercy. Don't you see? See, y'all? God said, okay, all right, Gideon, go ahead, put me to the test. And God indulged him. Didn't have to, but God indulged him. But as a result of that, he put Gideon to the test. Now, let me make a point here. God called Gideon. Gideon was God's choice to be the people who was going to speak and lead the people at that particular time in the position of the judge. All right? God called him to lead the people through that. But God still tested him. See, we want to question the calling when we start seeing the tests. You don't get to question the calling because the tests start coming. You know, the test is because God knows you still got questions. So God instead said, I'm going to answer your questions through the test. Anybody hear what I'm saying tonight? Or is this just for me? God is saying, you got questions. I'm gonna deal with your questions, but as a result of it, you got more tests you got to go through. First, he makes Gideon send home anyone who's afraid. Now, you remember, it's 32,000. Is that right? Yeah, 32,000 men, and we'll read it later in chapter 7. But 32,000 men, you got to understand, Gideon stand before God, got 32,000 men behind his swords and shields, all looking like Thor, ripped up in the middle, and all that stuff. You know, got the Thor hammer. They're ready to fight 32,000. And God say, oh, this what you're going to do battle with, Gideon? Yeah, these are my boys. I gathered up some of the baddest boys, and these boys, they're ready to fight. And then notice what happened. God says, all right, any of y'all who are afraid, go home. It turns out 22,000 of the 32,000, they had doubts. And God said, anybody got doubts, go home. 22,000 of them went home. Y'all don't hear what I'm saying. So let me say it again. Let me say it another way. See, you can be standing with people, and people be standing with you, but all they need is opportunity to leave on you. Woo! All they need is an opportunity to quit on you. They be standing right there. I'm with you. To death do his part. To thick and dead. To Jesus come back and more. And to God, let's split wrists and show that we blood, brothers and sisters. And then somebody just asks them one little question there. Poof, they're gone. Now let's read some more verses just to show us that. So the Lord said to Gideon, the people who are with you, 2 men and Midian, Israel boasts, my own power has delivered me. Let's go to verse 3. This is chapter 7. Now therefore come, proclaiming in the hearing of the people, saying, whoever is afraid and trembling, let him return and depart from Mount Gilead. So 22,000 people left. 10,000 stayed. He had 32,000 warriors standing with him, and God just said this, anybody scared want to go home? 22,000 people went home. I'm with you, Pastor. I got you. I got you. Don't worry about it. But boy, if they're given an out, they will escape. They'll leave. Let me read a couple more verses. Then the Lord said to Gideon, the people are still too many. Bring them down to the water. And he said, I will test them for you there. Therefore it shall be that he of whom I say to you, this one shall go with you, he shall go with you. But every one of whom I say to you, this one shall not go with you, he shall not go with you. Now, y'all, let me read the next verse and I'll explain. So he brought the people down to the water, and the Lord said to Gideon, you shall separate everyone who laps the water with his tongue as a dog lap, as well as everyone who kneels to drink. Now, they will go down to the river, bank, lake, whatever, stream, whatever you call it. And if they, my wife will kill me if I get on the ground, but if they laid on their stomach, and did this, or put their head down like a dog and lapped it, then God say send them home. But if they got to it and they kneel down, one on one knee and still had to handle his sword and brought the water up to them, God said those are the ones to fight. Now, I got to tell you, again, years and years ago, I heard a preacher preach about homosexuality from this verse. And it threw me for a loop. It threw me for a loop. Because basically he was saying, yeah, the one who laughed like dogs was gay, and he preached that thing, and at the end he let Jesus die a couple of times, didn't he? And for years, because I was exposed to this, I kind of thought this, okay, but I never ever got the proper connotation of it. See, you know who's a warrior because a warrior, when he know, and the enemy is around him, he know the enemies are there because they've been looting them, all right? So what he does is they go down there and they got the sword and the shield, they keep one knee down and they bring the water up, to their face because they still looking out for what? For the enemy. But man, if you got somebody go down there and put the head all down up in it like that, God like say, you don't want him? And you know how many of them did that? 22, I'm sorry, 10,000. No, I'm sorry, 97,700 did that. Because you only had 10,000 left, I'm sorry. He started with 32,000. He asked anybody scared, 22,000 said, yeah, they went home. So he got 10,000 left. He said, all right, take them down to the water and we'll separate them based on who drink like what. The ones that put the head all down, lapped it like a dog, which was 9,700 of them. He said, they don't even know how to fight. Basically, that's what he said. Send them home. And help me. Let me tell y'all, you don't ever want somebody to fight with you who don't know how to fight. Somebody asked me why. Man, you'll get hurt messing around. Man, I'd rather fight by myself if when you get in here, you kicking me in the back of the head and all that type of stuff. So he's literally saying, those 9,700, they don't even know how to fight. Since they don't know how to fight, they don't need to go with you. Here's what you do. You got 300 from 32,000 down to 300. Somebody ain't hearing what I'm saying. So we're going to read this, and we're going to let this thing go tonight. Listen to this. With just 300 men now, Gideon knows he has only God to rely on. God needs to provide a miracle. But God has even other plan in place. They won't even have to invade or attack or wipe out the Midianites. He has created as much noise. He have them create as much noise by blaring trumpets and smashing jars that this confuses the Midianites at camp, and they end up killing each other. When you read the story, they didn't even pull out a fight. They didn't even do the sword fight. They had jars and all of this stuff, and when God told them to, because they went up on the camp where they was at, when God told them to bam and break the jars together and all of that, the Midianites woke up, and they just started swinging swords. Killing each other. No one from Gideon's army had to even pull a sword out. You see how God gave them the victory? They killed themselves. Now, God could have did that with the 32,000, couldn't he? We'll talk about that next week. But he only did it with the 300. So, what can we learn from Gideon's story? And I'll close with these 2 points. God can work with a little bit of faith. Overall, we learn that God can work through anyone, even timid believers with little faith. A leader doesn't always have to be the boldest and the most extroverted one. God often works through believers who come from the least of the least, like Mike Boston. When we are hiding from what scares us the most, God compels us to tackle it head on. Second thing, God wants us to trust him. God doesn't allow metaphorical crutches, although he plays along with Gideon's fleece test. When it comes to the actual battle, God refuses to let Gideon have a cushion of a bulky army, reducing them to the bare essentials of 300. They know they have to what now? Rely on God for victory. Church, are you hearing what I'm saying? Seeing big, we'll talk about that next week. The same is happening in our lives. We can often have various cushions that offer us comfort. Maybe we have jobs that provide enough income for a cozy retirement, or other members of the church who can step up in leadership roles so we don't have to fill them ourselves, or we can only hide on the threshing floor, if you will, for as long before God pulls us out of our comfort zone to do his what? Amazing work. See, it's still some Gideons, y'all, hiding on the threshing floors in this ministry right here. And God want to pull them out so they can do some amazing work. No matter what the case, God will reduce our numbers. Did you hear what I said? God will reduce our numbers. Yeah, you didn't hear what I said. You hear what I said? See, a lot of folks like to pray for the big number. God, no. See, if I let that come, then you ain't going to think it's me doing it. God will reduce our numbers down to 300, if you will. When he does, we have to rely on him to do what we thought was impossible. I close with this. And we'll pick back up with Gideon next week. God uses ordinary people to accomplish his plans. And the key to Gideon's success was he was willing to obey God. Ladies and gentlemen, God has other plans. The question we've got to ask ourselves, will we surrender to God's other plans for us? Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I appreciate this time.